The records were meant to burn. The courthouse stove roared with paper that night in 1873, swallowing names and columns and figures until only sparks rose in the dark. Men claimed it was nothing, just housekeeping of faulty documents. But if you turned through the remains later, if you brushed the ash across your palm, you would see fragments, blurred strokes of ink, a hand that trembled as it wrote, Timothy Caldwell, born 1867, wounds when cut, no pulse when examined, no progress. That is all that should have remained. But Tennessee soil does not allow secrets to rot quietly. And so, even as the ledgers turned to smoke, a darker archive began to write itself, in the mouths of neighbors, in the diaries buried beneath floorboards, in the shadows of ruined farmhouses. One name, repeating, the boy that science could not explain. In every telling it begins with silence. A boy born pale, too pale, as though his veins carried not blood but chalk dust. His mother swaddled him, kissed his face, and yet recoiled at the coldness in his skin. The midwife said it was weakness. The doctor said it was chill, but years later they would remember that chill as something else, a sign. 16 feet he fell from the top of the hayloft, his skull meeting wood hard enough to split. Men ran, already expecting the limp stillness of a corpse. And yet the child rose. He brushed himself off. He smiled, a tight, joyless thing that no 6-year-old should know. Not a drop of blood stained his skin. The hired hand who saw swore this until his dying day swore it and shuddered. It was the laugh of a sermon on hell, he said, and his eyes were too steady, too empty. That was only the beginning. When the parish book was checked for his baptism, the page revealed a wound stranger than any child could carry. The line, where his name once lay in ink, was torn through, scraped until parchment itself gave way, leaving a ragged mouth of paper. Later a new name appeared, a brother's, a cousin's. But the whole told the truth more than the queel. Still people were afraid to whisper too loudly. Neighbors said the child wandered past midnight, that his silhouette pressed against the chapel window though the doors were locked, his lips moving in words written nowhere in scripture. Others swore he lingered by riverbanks, stepping into the water, until the current closed above his head, only to walk through his front door later, dry as dust. The minister's wife kept her secret journal between household inventories. The boy is not like others, she wrote in an even hand. When he kneels, he prays in silence to something older. His shadow does not obey him. It leaves half a breath of delay when he moves. Science could not explain it, and science feared what it could not explain. Dr. Horace Lyman kept his separate journal, hidden from his colleagues. March 3, 1869, I examined the child. His wrist bore no pulse. His chest carried no rhythm. By our measure of life he is dead, yet he rises, he blinks, he listens. When I pierced his arm, the blade came away clean. At the table with his family he ate bread as any child. I must not submit this report. I will be ruined. But God forgive me, what child is this? He never spoke of it again. Those who tried to report met silence, mockery, or worse. The town clerks filed only vague notes, disturbance in enumeration, behavioral difficulty. The specific name, Timothy, refused to sit still on paper. It appeared one year, vanished the next, returned again as if some hand of ink were playing games. And in time the hand of fire moved across the documents. Whole folders fed into the courthouse stove. Yet not all burned. One archivist flinched back from the heat, tore away a half-charred leaf, and slipped it into his coat for no reason he could later name. That scrap would leak across decades, now blackened at every edge, the text fragmented but enough to show one line. The boy does not bleed, so why erase him? Why bend records, fire pages, erase columns with trembling hands? A town afraid of ridicule, doctors terrified of their failures, or something older, something whispered in barns and kitchens, never recorded, never clean. The truth is this: Timothy Caldwell was not a sickness. He was not a miracle. He was a contradiction, and contradictions are death to both churches and sciences. So they buried him in smoke, but the smoke betrayed them. The ash still breathes. His name still echoes through oral tales, and his shadow still lingers half a second too long where none should be. Stay with me, subscribe if you dare, because this is only the opening of the archive. The boy lies ahead step by step, and his story is longer, darker, heavier than the institutions allowed. Why did this happen, and why was it erased? We move now into the marrow of history itself. The year is 1867. America's raw flesh still healing from bayonets and cannon fire. The war is over, but the wounds linger in soil and bone and memory. Across Tennessee, farms return to planting. Men return home with empty sleeves where arms once belonged, with voices that crack in drunken hymns. The towns look respectable, church bells tolling on Sunday, black suits pressed, children lined up barefoot outside clapboard schools. But beneath the surface, ghosts, hunger, fever that clings in the lungs, and a kind of dread that does not carry the shape of war, but of something else. Against this fragile order stands a farmhouse at the edge of Knox County. Wooden beams gray with weather, tin roof beaten thin, cornrows stretching into the mud. The Caldwell family appears ordinary. A father broken in back from work, a mother holding her Bible to the breast, siblings laughing, quarreling, squatting barefoot in dust. Nothing strange, nothing worth a headline. And yet within this household their middle child, Timothy, unsettles even those who love him. His body does not follow rhythm. He does not bruise, he does not bleed. Worsey, the boy does not grow as he should. At 7 years he bears the same smallness of 6. At 10 the same narrow shoulders. His hair lightens rather than darkens. His frame remains slim, untouched by season or sickness. Mothers in town nod politely but whisper when backs are turned. His father insists it is nothing. His siblings avoid standing near. Newspapers of the era record cholera, accidents in coal pits, theft, and sermons. But never him, and yet we find traces buried deep between the lines. The Knoxville Ledger, May 14, 1870. Certain disturbances in the county census have required correction. Discrepancies in enumeration to be disregarded. Discrepancies that shift numbers only in one farmhouse. Private letters tell what newspapers never dared. A schoolteacher writes in a note preserved at the Tennessee Historical Society, "Of the Caldwell child, I must confess in strictest confidence, he is unlike any scholar. When struck with the rod he neither cries nor reddens. When he runs upon stones no cut appears. Other boys call him Ghost, I know not what to mark in my roll book. One day his name appears in my mind, another I forget. It is as if something erases him, then places him back. A doctor's bag then was leather, carrying saws, chloroform, laudanum. Life or death split by crude stitch or brutal amputation. Imagine such a man kneeling by a white-skinned boy with no pulse. His whole profession, already stripped of confidence by the bloodletting scandals, by failure after failure, now confronted with a shape that mocks it. They knew influenza, they knew war wounds. They did not know this. These men permitted cholera to be called, miasma rising from marshes. How then to classify a child who walks, laughs, eats without life? It should not be. The context continues Reconstruction. A South without slavery but laced with bitterness. Confederate veterans bowed in prayer during Sundays, yet whispered old folklore by firesides, tales older than their war. Stories carried from ancestors of white children seen at crossroads, of laughter echoing from empty fields, of pale strangers asking for bread and leaving no footprints. Timothy's strangeness found a vocabulary there, for the official line was silence, but in folklore people had words ready: changeling, fetch, deathless, hollow child. The local church, St. Michael's, carried itself as a bastion of order. Bells tolled, sermons thundered, pews filled. The minister presented his parish as untroubled, faithful Christian. But minutes preserved from a vestry meeting in 1871 include an oddly worded complaint. Certain rumors, certain sightings, are to be discouraged from notice in formal gathering. Children are to be reminded by parents not to wander at night nor cast mockery at one another in the form of ghostly names. The letter never names Timothy. It does not dare, yet its warning lingers like smoke. Only one child in that parish carried the word ghost upon him, and so the respectable surface families praying, schools teaching, doctors bleeding, ledgers binding, sermons booming, a county clawing its way out of ruin, stitching together columns of numbers to pretend order. Behind curtains, behind doors, there is the thing they cannot write in clean ink: a boy who should not be. A boy who interrupts the neat narrative of recovery. A boy who turns every house of order into a trembling stage. Even travel writers noted something uncanny. A Yankee visitor to the region wrote in a book published decades later, "I stumbled one evening upon a farmhouse where the people appeared unnerved by their own offspring. The middle child, pale, slight, kept his eyes on the river beyond. Never have I seen a family so determined to deny a face. At supper they looked everywhere but toward him, as if their own plates would vanish should they watch him eat." The man never identified the child, but those who later read his text in Tennessee nodded quietly. They knew. Science books from the 1860s classify diseases into categories now laughable to us. But even then, the word used most often for anomalies was disturbance. Disturbance in circulation, disturbance in reason. A boy with no pulse was not a miracle, not a curse, not even an affliction. He was simply mad disturbance. Farmers muttered over whiskey that the Caldwells must have read forbidden words long before the boy's birth, that Union soldiers had buried something near their property, that an old grave of native soil had been cut through when corn was planted, or worse, whispers that the child was never born from his mother at all, but come from another place and put into her hands while she screamed. These whispers stand beside the clean surface of history like rot beneath wallpaper. Understand the context: a county where names mattered, where records were sacred, where the war had left chaos. To control names was to control truth. Erase a name, erase a body. Erase his census, erase his reality. The South of 1867 wanted order, wanted things to be plain, survivable, manageable. Timothy Caldwell, quiet, pale, unsettling, was none of those. He was disturbance, and disturbance in this fragile season of reconstruction could not be allowed to live in words. Yet he walked, yet he stared, yet he lingered, and so the erasures only deepened. They say the boy first frightened the town when he fell and did not break, but it did not end there. He courted accident the way other children courted play. From the loft he tumbled, from trees he dropped, from hillsides he rolled. Always laughter, hollow laughter, never bruise, never shudder, never wound. Children dared each other to strike him with sticks. He let them. The blows landed but left nothing. He grinned as they grew pale. I don't feel it, he told them. But the words had a weight beyond bravado. It was not a claim of toughness, not a boy boasting. There was no blood to back it, only absence. One boy cried out later to his mother, I hit him, he should have blood. But his skin it opened, yet nothing came. These lips closed and no mark stayed. The mother washed her son's mouth with soap for blasphemy. But soon enough every parent knew. The Holston River runs dark where it curves near the Caldwell farm. It is said he stepped into it one August evening after sunset. He walked in until the current rose past his neck. He let go. The water took him. His siblings screamed from the shore. Neighbors ran. They calmed downstream. And then, hours later, his figure appeared in the doorway of the farmhouse, hair dry, clothes unstained, his white shirt crisp as dust. His mother fainted. His father barred the shutters. The siblings did not ask, and for weeks after the river moved slower, as if some exchange had burdened it. One fisherman told his mates, I saw the boy's face below the surface the next dawn, pale as stone, the eyes open, studying me. Yet he stood breathing ash on his porch that very afternoon. The fisherman never returned to that bend. The minister's wife wrote the words. She could not keep them inside her body. This page survived, folded beneath the Psalms. I woke past midnight and found him kneeling by the chapel window, lips moving against silence. He remained though the doors were locked, his eyes fixed toward the altar where no candles burned. I thought once to call my husband, but fear sealed me. She ends with a break in her hand. If I speak this aloud, it will consume me. If I deny it, I will be complicit. God forgive the mothers who bore such a child. Later, stains of wax ran across that diary page, as if she tried to burn it herself, but it survived. Several versions survive of Dr. Horace Limon's encounter. The one most often repeated is written in his own cramped hand. I laid the boy upon the table. Not a stir, not a vein or of breath. The candle tried to flicker with his chest, but it did not. His eyes returned my gaze. A child of 6 should squirm, should wriggle. He did not. He waited. When I cut shallow as to lance, the skin parted, and yet the blade remained dry. No wetness. My fingers trembled. His father asked nothing. His mother wept no tears. Only the boy stared, a twin of marble warmed by none. What physician can survive such knowledge? He never submitted it to journals. He wrote it only for his own mirror. Later he tried to burn it, but the edge blackened and left the words legible still. Rumors divide again at this night. Some insist the barn caught flame from a lightning strike. Others insist Timothy himself lit a candle where hay was too dry. The event itself is certain. The barn blazed into torch heat while livestock screamed. Neighbors rushed. They dragged cattle free. The Caldwell family stood wailing as beams fell, all except for Timothy. He remained in the loft, framed against fire, looking down like an effigy in some dark rite. He did not move until wood burst around him. Then, when flames folded in, he walked calmly down the collapsing ladder, through smoke, skin unblistered. A man swore he saw the boy's hair singe red, then turn pale again a moment later. Another swore he caught the sound of chant beneath crackling flame. The official record says, a barn destroyed by accident, children unharmed. But neighbors all spoke the same night of the boy who does not burn. Official report accident. Physicians note contrivance of nature. Neighbors whisper revenant. Which is truth? Not everyone agreed on what happened. Not everyone could. One thing joined their claims: the boy did not operate by law, either natural or divine. Every telling ended with a pause, with a dread. They repeated it with lips dry, with eyes averting the page. But not everyone agreed what truly happened. And so the story never closed. He attended lessons, yes, but no one recalled him learning. He sat at desks but left no sound of chalk. His name appeared in the roll, sometimes a scrawl later erased, sometimes doubled. Teachers complained of confusion. Children began to refuse sitting near him. One girl fainted when she saw him cross without lifting his feet. She claimed the planks of the schoolhouse floor showed no impression beneath his steps. Only the figure moved, no weight. The teacher spanked her for boasting fables. Yet when the census came again, the numbers changed once more. 5, 4, 6, then 5 again. The ink itself seemed to rewrite. A letter from an elder Caldwell daughter survived into the 1920s, discovered hidden inside a Bible cover. I must not name him, but he was brother in birth. We did not speak to him if no one forced us. When he walked the hall at night, the boards creaked a note behind his feet, as if his shadow still followed though he had passed. He ate little, but mother placed food before him. Father prayed, then beat him with rod when no pulse shook his wrist. Nothing changed. He rose again each dawn. On Sundays he sang without voice. Imagine the weight of a family forced to house such a child, to love him and yet not know how. A son who returned their gaze with eyes too still, too hollow. A creature half within, half without their world. By 1871 most in Knox County avoided the Caldwell farm. Goods were declined, marriages not sought. Whispers hardened. Some said the boy had drowned in the river and returned. Others said he was stolen at birth, a thing substituted in his swaddling. The boldest said he was born of no blood at all, only ash that fell from the sky into the mother's arms. And then came reports, far fewer, but darker still, that Timothy's image was sighted twice in the same evening. One child swore to seeing him at the well, while another swore he stood by the river. When asked, the boy shook his head and smiled. The tale of Timothy Caldwell splits like broken glass. Each shard reflects a different truth. Some glint with the light of science, others drown in superstition, and still others drip with conspiracy darker than both. When men tried to capture him in words, their hands trembled, and so contradictions piled, heavy, unbearable. Physicians who dared speak of him chose caution. In journals that survive, the language is clinical, clean but hollow. They did not write the boy's name. They wrote only of a subject in East Tennessee, presenting unusual symptoms. One claimed congenital analgesia, a body incapable of pain. Another guessed a clotting disease that struck the blood invisible, but then they stumbled on contradictions they could not smooth. Why no fever, no bruising, no pulse? Why no change across years? The word disease tastes safe on a physician's lips, but private margins tell a different story. A scrawled note in one journal reads, "No pulse, no growth. Science forbids this testimony. I must destroy it." And yet he wrote it anyway. Even science, rigid and cold, left fearful fragments behind. Priests and ministers could not agree either. Some insisted the boy was proof of God's mercy, a miracle child striding without hurt. Others condemned him as counterfeit, a deception stitched by the devil. A sermon delivered in secret, scribbled from memory by a member of the flock, declares, "He is flesh with no covenant of blood. Do not name him among your number, nor welcome him to your table. For the child of no blood is the child of none." Yet others whispered he was angel, that his silence was sanctity, that he was a sign. Yet none of them dared write it into the official liturgy, and so even the church split upon itself, voices breaking across pulpits, some kneeling, others trembling. Neighbors had their theories coughed between mugs of whiskey and rocking chairs creaking on porches. One said the boy was the ghost of a Confederate soldier, returned not to haunt but to live again, stuck in the skin of a child and forced to repeat life. Another claimed Union surgeons had worked an experiment upon him in secret, binding his wounds so tightly that no blood flowed at all. Farm women whispered that his mother was not his mother at all, that she came home one morning holding a child not born of her pain, that she wept too long and too hard that winter, and the creature she carried was not the one she bore. And old men muttered darker that the family had made a pact, a ritual of burial earth and whispering fires. That Timothy was proof. Each tongue told it differently, each word contradicted the last, but every voice ended in confession. The boy does not belong. Columnists in later decades dug into the records, what little survived, and traced erasures back to county clerks. Handwriting did not match. Dates slipped wildly. One census was signed by a man who had been dead already 2 years. What hand plucked pages away and slid false numbers in their place? What authority ordered fire upon the ledgers? Conspiracy wins through the ashes, perhaps a local government silencing shame, perhaps a doctor sealing his failures, perhaps a church erasing a scandalous figure from its flock. But others believe the conspiracy stretches deeper, that an unnamed society of natural philosophers sought not to silence but to conceal for study, that Timothy was taken in 1873 from the family, not lost to grave but moved to an institution where doors were locked and windows barred. Some claims whisper that his likeness appeared in sketches from an asylum in Ohio decades later. Tiny frame, pale hair, eyes that showed no childhood, yet every conspiracy ends in silence, no official death, no returned testimony, only vanished ink, in every telling one constant erasure. The papers laughed. One editor wrote, "The talk of a spectral boy who bleeds not is the delirium of uneducated rustics." The physicians tore their own pages, then burned the margins. The church stamped with silence what its members whispered with dread. The neighbors always returned to rumor when lamps dimmed, and each account denies the other, contradicts without shame. The boy becomes accident, spirit, experiment, omen, curse. He is everything at once, therefore nothing at all. To believe one voice is to condemn the rest, but uncertainty itself is the snare. The more they tried to define him, the darker his shadow grew, and that shadow lingers still. Was he angel, devil, spirit, science, myth? Every account swears a different truth. The papers called it negligence, but locals whispered of something darker. The physicians saw anomaly, the church spelled curse. What is left to us now, a century later, but a boy's name fluttering like ash across half-burned pages? Where truth should sit, there is only a gap, hollow and hungry, and that hollowness, like the boy himself, feeds on our doubt. By the spring of 1873, the Caldwell farmhouse appeared in tax ledgers one final time. After that, the column turns blank. The land returned to county possession. No auction, no probate, no death certificates. The family simply gone. Neighbors looked across empty fields and saw curtains moving though nobody lived inside. Smoke rising from a chimney where no wood was thrown. Some said Timothy lingered even when the others vanished, his pale face watching the road with an expression unreadable, unending. Census takers crossed the name out. County clerks filed no birth, no death, no burial. And yet the gaps scream louder than any words. Old photographs, long since crumbled at the corners, show the Caldwell house leaning beneath grey skies. Windows boarded, grass crept to cover the steps. In some frames, children stand in front grinning, tourists or daring locals who posed as if mocking fear. In others, the lens caught something else, a blur against the glass behind the children, high in the attic window. In one image, the blur bears eyes. In another, it looks like a smudge from an unwashed plate. Or perhaps is only suggestion, the way our minds conjure outline when history leaves an absence. But those who looked long enough said this: the blur's face never ages, no matter which year. It never changes, yet the children at the porch grow tall, frail, and old. Farmers walking home across dusk muttered they heard footsteps beside them even when fields stretched empty. In town, mothers warned children not to call one another ghost child, lest the pale boy himself appear from behind the churchyard. By the turn of the century, the story became tradition. In saloons, when lanterns guttered low, old men leaned close and said, "There was one in this county who did not bleed, who did not breathe, yet walked with us. Best not say his name." They would spit after the silence as though ridding themselves of an aftertaste. Timothy Caldwell became less a person than a curse word. Deep in the church archives, in a locked drawer rarely opened, there rests a leaf of parchment blackened along every edge. It smells of ash even today. The ink in its center survives only in fragments, but these fragments remain. The boys present without a heartbeat, as parents insist table set. I fear no death, only delay. Archivists claim they hear a ringing in their ears if they look too long. Some refuse to handle the paper, preferring gloves, crosses, muttered prayers. The church itself denies its existence, but once you know, you cannot turn away. Into the last century, motorists reported a child figure at crossroads near the Holston River, pale against headlights, staring too long before fading back into the trees. Campers swore they felt breath on their shoulders when no one stood behind them, and those foolish enough to trespass the Caldwell ruins at night claimed to see him in mirrors. Always in mirrors, a child of 10 locked in the glass though the body outside should have aged, with eyes far older than the reflection of any living boy. Even today, if you linger on certain roads, the silence thickens. You hear another set of steps, and a name forms at the back of your throat though you swore you would not speak it. When the story was fresh, they tried to erase him. Scientists with their scalpels and journals, priests with sermons brittle as paper, clerks with ink black as tar, and perhaps their failure was inevitable. Because the human mind does not forget anomalies. It hides them in folklore, it sews them into rumor, but in truth we remember most the things that do not fit. He became disturbance itself, incarnate, a scar that will not smooth. The Caldwell family is gone, the farmhouse is dust, but the boy survives in every account, in every denial, in every silence, preserved not by science nor by church but by dread, and so the tale ends by refusing to end. His name lingers, his absence presses, his shadow stays a breath too long where stories gather. Perhaps you will find the missing entries if you are reckless enough to dig. Perhaps the boy's census number survived in some forgotten drawer. Perhaps his diary rests waiting, its edges unburned. And if you open it, if you truly read, you may feel the silence stretch across your chest, stifling the rhythm you trust so dearly. For Timothy Caldwell has never died in any page, in any grave, in any rumor. And if he does not die, then who among us will dare to write his ending? If you wish for more of these buried histories, torn from flames and whispered in smoke, subscribe now, and share your theory in the shadows of the comments. But beware, for once a name is spoken, it does not let go, it lingers, it repeats. Timothy, Timothy, Timothy.